Welcome to the Soul Archaeology podcast, a space for connection, resonance, witnessing, and learning. Together we'll harvest medicine from the spiral of life, sharing conversations with other embodied humans who have navigated their own initiations and found alignment with their true soul essence. With weekly astrology, energy updates, embodied conversation, and channeled teachings, this is a space for you to land and find resonance with the spiral of your own soul. Hello everyone, welcome back to Soul Archaeology. Thank you for being here. It's quite an intense time. I'm hearing that from a lot of people, a lot of clients, a lot of friends, family, as we navigate the ending of this 2023, this wild year that has been so transformative, so supportive of our growth and evolution, but at many different points on the timeline, also very intense. And I'm really feeling this interesting point that we're in where we're closing so many chapters and opening new doors, but perhaps those doors aren't fully revealing themselves. We are in a Mercury Retrograde, so it can feel a little cloudy or fuzzy, or, maybe the external doesn't feel as clear, but the internal does. Maybe you're noticing the patterns within you that are surfacing as you feel the activations, but plans or timelines are a little blurry. That's definitely the nature of a retrograde. And as we're closing this 15-year chapter, over 15-year chapter with Pluto and Capricorn, it does dip back briefly next fall into Capricorn, but we'll be spending most of this year with Pluto and Aquarius. At the end of January, it shifts. So there's so much that's happening, that's occurring for review. Many things that are coming forward for us to look at, to sit with, to be with. And this is especially affecting those of us who have cardinal placements. So Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn. Though Pluto has either been squaring, opposing, or has been conjunct some of your planets. And whatever planets you have there tells a different story, of course, but that's a big story. And it's definitely related to your evolutionary journey here on this planet and why you came here. And so if you're noticing a lot of chapters closing, or maybe you're not even noticing that, maybe you're feeling this internal sort of slowing down, or noticing, witnessing what's arising within you as something external shifts, just know you're right on time. And what I'm seeing mostly with myself and with clients, family, friends, is that so many of our core wounds, and a core wound is really, a wounding that we either came into this life with that wants to be remedied or worked through in this incarnation, or it's something we experienced in childhood, or it's something we inherited ancestrally, but it makes it core because it's at the core of our being, and it's separating us from an aspect of ourselves. But many of our core wounds, our deepest fears, are coming forward right now to be worked through, to be witnessed, to be seen, to be honestly transmuted, or to bring us into transmutation. I just saw something on Instagram a few days ago, and I apologize because I cannot remember the name of the person who wrote it, and I hate that, but if you know, feel free to message me and I'll put a little note on Instagram. But it basically was, they were saying that we don't transmute our emotions transmute us. They are here to help us change and evolve and grow and shift and evolve. I don't know if I said evolve. So knowing that they're just really data points, they're information. And I know our fear in particular is an indication that we are nearing something that's important to cross through. And I know many of you I've been talking to have had your big fears come forward. And there's so much held in those fears. And today I'm going to talk about one of my greatest fears, which was losing my dog Arlo, and how it is become the gateway to some of my deepest healing. The journey this year that I've been on to prepare for losing him, and the actual event, how it's already begun to transform me. We are entering a week of continued Mercury Retrograde, which will last through January 1st. And we are also entering Capricorn season. The solstice is on the 21st, Capricorn season this week as well. And so there will certainly be a sobering of the energy. We've been expanding a lot, sort of witnessing these pockets of expansion where we see what the next sort of phase or chapter looks like. And then a lot of, contraction too, which I talked about last week, but is the contraction that we experience when we approach a threshold is an essential part of it. And there are many pieces and parts of us that require contraction. I mean, the natural phase is the contraction and the expansion, and the contraction is a preparation or a pulling in of the energy to reorient or to refocus or to regain some power. And we need those contractions to propel us forward as we expand. And I've certainly been feeling a contraction. I started feeling it really, I don't know, it's kind of been a fall of contraction. There's been a lot of expansion, but a lot of contraction too. And winter itself is a bit of a contraction. And so I know many people feel the intensity of the holidays because there's so much that is surfacing and coming forward to, be witnessed within us. Our families, our friends even serve as strong mirrors. So just know that you can kind of go back into some other episodes to gain some tools and resources to, navigate this time period, but certainly honoring your boundaries, knowing where your threshold is, what your capacity is for, socializing this holiday season. It might be different, and that's something I really, really, really have been trying to work with people on, is remembering that our capacity changes depending on what we're navigating. So your capacity during a contraction is different than your capacity during an expansion. So just know, kind of tune in, check in with yourself, see where you're at. What do you need? It serves no one to bypass or bulldoze a boundary, and your boundaries might be different than they were a month ago. They might be different than they were last holiday season. However, whatever you celebrate and however you celebrate this time of year, or maybe you don't celebrate at all, there's still this sort of introspective process that we all go through. It's just the nature of this time, regardless of the Gregorian calendar. As we close this chapter on 15 to 16 years, it's powerful to sort of sit back and say, where were you in 2008? What have been the main themes you've been navigating? And to sit with those as we go into the deepening of this wintering season, this sacred season of contraction, of accumulating wisdom, medicine, nutrients, all the things we need to enter into the next phase. And something else I've really been noticing, because we have so much change occurring just as a species, we're in, this quantum leap in evolution, this golden age, and we're experiencing so much change. And even if you're not maybe conscious of it, our cells are grieving. And grief is, something that I'm so passionate about studying and understanding. And I think that, my life in many ways has had a heavy presence of grief for whatever reason. I think that, I've just felt things very deeply in my life, and I've felt the pain of the world and felt the pain of my family and my ancestry, my lineage, my past lives, this incarnation, which has, been a really powerful and beautiful one, but also challenging in a lot of ways. And being a Scorpio rising, you just feel a whole lot, and I think this path, this journey that I'm on has been one of reckoning with grief, reckoning with my relationship with grief, with fear, but also joy, and understanding that grief and joy are sisters. And Francis Weller says that, and he's such a, an incredible writer, psychotherapist, and guide. And his medicine is something I really lean into when I know I'm navigating a grief portal. And it's important to remember that grief doesn't only come through when we experience something cataclysmic, like a loss of a loved one or a breakup, or all the things, I can't think of them now, but all the things that bring grief, into our lives in a very apparent way, sort of like, everyone knows we're grieving when we have a family member die or a loved one pass, but grief is held in the little pockets too. It's held in the spaces that we don't always think of when we're going through change, even if it's an incredible, exciting change. There's grief that can be held there because there's loss. And when we think about our capacity to process and be with grief, it's in direct correlation to our ability to be with joy. And I've been working through a grief process with a dear client of mine who I've been working with for, 2 years now. And she's been a mentorship client. And we've navigated some really profound cycles together and done some deep work. And one of my greatest honors is getting to work with people through very sacred portals, like, just big transformative portals. And with her, it was the loss of her father. And there were so many spaces where the grief was so intense and so heavy and scary, at certain points, just felt so intense. It's sort of like, will you crack in half, from the pain. And she was so present through these spaces and stayed so close to herself in the way that she really needed. She's in a very big contraction, right? She's gathering the parts of her that haven't been able to feel what they've needed to feel throughout her life. And what she's also experienced, which has been really incredible, is this gigantic heart opening, this gigantic expansion of the spaces that she has been afraid to enter into. And it's important to remember that when we feel an emotion, or when we know an emotion is present or getting activated, we're not only feeling the present emotion, we're feeling it resonate all of the times that we didn't get a chance to feel what it is we needed to feel. So she's grieving her childhood. She's grieving memories from, her youngest years. She's grieving her adult self. She's grieving the loss of herself connected to him. She's grieving the patterns that she's letting go of, even though she's so happy to let go of them. They passed with her father, which is incredible, but she's letting go of those. And so I just, I'll do a whole episode on grief itself, but I just wanted to touch on a few things that, I've noticed in my work and in my life. And grief for me has been something that I've always feared so deeply. I think a lot of my attachments style, a lot of my attachment trauma is related to my deep, deep, deep fear of loss. And I worked through many, many, many layers of that. But my greatest teacher in that has been my boy Arlo. And if you know Arlo, or you got to know him through my Instagram, which I just love, it's been so sweet to receive the messages about how many people he touched. You probably could feel his light, his incredibly evolved soul through the photos and through our experiences together. And it's been such an incredible ride. It's been such the greatest gift, honestly, I've ever received. And I had no idea when I got him how much I needed him. I got him back in 2010. He was a puppy, 12 weeks old, and I was in sort of a weird space. I was processing the breakup of my high school college boyfriend, which was really, really hard for me. And I didn't know this at the time, but I had pretty intense attachment trauma. I had big surgeries, which created a lot of abandonment wounds and things that just created a lot of fear of loss and a lot of fear of disconnection, which I want to go into in another podcast episode of just like how I work with attachment wounds personally and with my clients, and how I see that oftentimes our abandonment wound is sort of the root of our suffering, a lot of our suffering. And so for me, I was fresh out of this relationship, which was a really difficult one for me. And it was, just held a lot of my core wounds. And looking back, it's right around that time that that Pluto started its transit through Capricorn, which would have been squaring my sun and my Mercury in my 12th house. And it was just a lot. So I got Arlo in 2010, and I picked him up right before the solstice. I think it was the 13th of December, I believe. And I just wanted a dog. I'd never had a dog of my own, like personally. And I just knew I wanted a dog. So I found him on Craigslist, and, you probably are aware now how passionate I am about rescuing dogs, in particular animals of all kinds, but just have such a soft space for dogs. And, knowing what I know now, of course, I probably would have rescued a dog, but he came to me exactly as he needed to, and the space opened for us to unite in this life. And I had no idea that this relationship would become or evolve into what it became. And I was 22 at the time. I had just turned 22, so I was a baby. And if you're 22 now, I'm not calling you a baby, but for me, I was a baby at 22. I was very, very mature. I was going through a lot. I was experiencing very intense anxiety, panic attacks. I was going through a huge transition. I was single for the first time in like 5 years or something. I was definitely going through it. I had a lot of lack of direction. I was living way outside of myself, and he came in as this just bundle of joy and love in such a beautiful way, but also such a strong and intense teacher. And he just slowly began working on me. It was like almost immediate. I became a mom. I started learning what it was like to take care of something besides myself. I was forced to become less selfish, although I think I continued into my 20s pretty selfish, but I started feeling his medicine almost immediately. It led me into the next chapter of my life, and I started dating about a year later my partner, my ex-partner, my ex-husband, and we were together for 8 years. And Arlo was certainly sort of like the through line for that relationship and through all of my 20s, and he catapulted me into my awakening. He started almost immediately with health issues. He had a mass on his ear when he was 4 months old that had to be removed. And I think at 1 or 2, actually it was 3, he had his first toe amputation because he had a very rare cancer in his toenail, in his nail bed, that ended up spreading to many different toes, and he eventually had 5 toes removed. But that started me down my path of transformation and coming back to myself and realizing it wasn't until I realized that my inability to be with my emotions, to process them healthily, affected him, that I started actually caring for myself. And he was the greatest teacher at that. It's interesting because he's a Libra as well. He was born on a full moon, so he's a Libra with an Aries sun. And he was the most loving and caring and selfless dog. And if you're wondering, yes, you can tell when a dog is selfless. I know it's funny because he's such a, we think about animals just sort of being animals, but they all have such different personalities. And I knew pretty quickly, when I really started my awakening process, that Arlo was an old soul. He was an evolved soul. He would come to any psychics, dressed in a suit and very serious, and even called himself a wizard. And I think he's a much more even evolved soul than I am. And he came here to help me reckon with my fear of loss and teaching me how to be present again. And I didn't realize that my inability to be present was making me sick, was making me sick, was making him sick. And he was so directly correlated to me and my emotions that I knew I had to take care of myself so I could take care of him. And what a great gift, a relationship that brings you into a deeper connection to self. And he really truly did that. I could feel his presence even when he wasn't present. I could feel, it was sort of like, what would Arlo do? Matt and I have been talking about that. It was, WWJD. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but I was raised Catholic, and that was sort of like a tagline, what would Jesus do? And it was very much so, what would Arlo do? And I felt his sort of presence anytime I made a decision. And of course I made decisions with him in mind because he was my dog and I was responsible for his well-being. But there were so many things that occurred throughout his life that forced me to be present with my sort of paralyzing fear of loss, my paralyzing fear of experiencing grief. And as you know, you've probably heard me talk about this many times on this podcast, but it's when we meet those fears that paralyze us, that we experience that all the liberation that we seek, the peace we seek, when we hold those fears out far, we can't live fully because we're separating out from ourselves. And it was, right around 7 when he was diagnosed with this cancer. Before, it was just sort of a fluke. We didn't realize that, he was going to be losing more toes, and that just catapulted me into the underworld. I knew I had to sit with, what is this paralyzing fear I have around losing him? And, part of it is that he is in many ways my safest relationship. He taught me unconditional love, presence, what it felt like to make mistakes and not receive repercussions. Of course, it's healthy to, receive repercussions sometimes, but for me, I had so much terror around making a mistake. And he always forgave me, and he always stayed by my side. And there was so much repair that occurred for me in my relational framework because of him. And I just knew that we had walked so many lifetimes together, and that our connection felt extremely old and extremely sacred. And I knew it was very special. And then when I began stepping into my work more deeply, my work with others, he became such a strong ally and is just such a strong guide. And he felt, really responsible for my growth and my evolution, but also that of my clients, the people I was working with. He understood my mission and he wanted to be so involved. And I eventually had to sort of kick him out of the operations manager role because he was taking on and processing too much in his in his body and had a really sensitive pancreas, but I wanted to make sure that he understood that his main role was to take care of himself, in his last few years. And animals are angels, and they absorb so much of the density on this planet. They're conduits of love. They're conduits of light. They process so much and deserve our love and our, appreciation. Oftentimes they don't get it. But for Arlo, I just knew he was doing such incredibly deep work on this planet. And he was such just a channel of light. And when we received that diagnosis when he was 7, that he had the squamous cell carcinoma in his nail bed, I immediately sort of catastrophized it. And, it was, looking back, it was important for me to go into that space of processing the fear around losing him, because it would bring me into a deeper journey that I needed to go on internally as well. But it certainly was extremely difficult to be with the idea of losing him. And I realized that this wasn't just, losing Arlo that I was processing, but the fear of loss that I've held within my cells, most of my life, in past lives, through my ancestry. And it really kind of forces you, it entraps you in a way, it informs your decisions. It informs your, likeliness to take risk and to go after what you truly want. And for me, it certainly stunted my growth up until that point. I was terrified of change. I was terrified of making a mistake. I was terrified of loss, and it just paralyzed me. And it's within that space that I started processing the fear of losing him. And he went on to, to live 6 more years, thankfully. But there was certainly a layer. That process started to begin. And I have been saying lately that my deepest fear over the last 13 years was losing Arlo. And I've been reckoning with that, knowing that it would be an inevitable. And I always sort of not laughed, but sort of joked in a, very dark way that I would just pass with him when it happened, because I love him so much. And I don't think that I'd be able to sort of navigate this life without him. And I'm still here. Spoiler alert. So I didn't die with him, but I kind of did, in an interesting way. And so for the last year, I've known that he was sort of nearing the end. He was diagnosed with liver masses in March, and at the time we thought they were malignant, because I opted to not do the exploratory abdominal surgery because it was so traumatic and so intense, and I just didn't want to put him through it. And he gave me the clear no as well. And now we believe that they were actually probably benign, because he wouldn't have been able to live so long if they were malignant. But there was so much that was present for me this year. There was a lot of grief because I'd undergone so much change. And there was this looming knowing that his end was nearing. And so in so many ways, it was just such a gift to just be able to be with that, and to know that we got to honor the ceremonial tapering off of his existence here. You might know if you follow me on Instagram, but he lost a lot of his mobility and lost the functioning of his back legs towards the end. And so I had purchased this buggy. We called it a buggy. It was really like a dog stroller, an extra large one because he was a big dog. And he rode around in that for many months, and we just had a lot more time than I had originally anticipated, and I'm so grateful for that. And we worked with our animal psychic, Miranda Alcott, who I'm going to have on this podcast as well, but it was such a gift having her to consult, because I was just so in it. I was going through so much emotionally that I couldn't connect with him in the way that felt very pure and clear for me until the end. And until that fear of losing him finally dissolved, because it informed everything I did up until that point. And it wasn't until really like the day before I finally lost him that I had this purity in our connection that was void of that fear of loss. And that's something that, I really wanted to touch on, is that oftentimes we view our relationships through our own perception of, our own perception. So it's informed by our fears, our emotions, and we're not seeing that person clearly necessarily. We're seeing our own self reflected in that person. And it was towards the end that I really saw him so clearly. I saw him in a way that I was afraid to see him before. And it was just such a gift, We knew only really a day before he actually passed that this was the time, that this was the exit point he was choosing. And we had just moved into our new house, so I feel like he got the opportunity to, make his mark there, to sort of stake his claim and on the place, and to, he had a few peas in the yard, and it was really his opportunity to see us into the next chapter. And I am eternally grateful for that, because he's, of course with us wherever we are, but it feels like he's so present in our new home. And he got to pass in our bed, and gosh, I thought I was ready to share this, but it's a lot. And he was able to pass in our bed with me holding him, and little did I know he was sending me signs before he actually passed. We'd been so busy the week before moving, and I was obviously very attuned to him, and just noticing how he was doing with the move. I'd had our animal psychic connect with him just to let him know that we were moving, and he knew, and he was happy about it. He was ready for the change. And I live in Topanga Canyon, and if you're not familiar with it, it's just outside of LA in California. But if you're not familiar with it, it's very wooded and mountainous, and, feels like you're in the wilderness, even though you're just outside of LA. But on the road that we live on, it's kind of cutting through a canyon, and there's just trees on either side, and a few houses, but mostly trees. And there was one spot that for 4 days in a row, I saw the same white dove just sitting on a branch on the side of the road. And it just sort of stuck out like a sore thumb. It was just bright white. I'd never seen a dove, that type of dove, in the wild before. And it was just sitting on the same branch for a week straight. And I kept seeing it 4 days in a row. I saw it. And finally on the last day, I think it was Friday, I stopped and took a picture of it, and I just kind of connected with it, and it made no sense that it was there. It just was, it felt like it had been placed there. And I wasn't sure why, of course. And I was kind of just in sort of tunnel vision. We were in survival mode in a way, just kind of like making sure we got moved in. We had so much to move, and we were just, in that sort of focus. And when I was connecting with Arlo, when we knew that he had chosen his exit point, and I had made peace with that and called on support to help him transition, the night before, I just slept with him on the floor and was just connecting with his heart and connecting with his soul and asking what he wanted me to know. And he was showing me these doves, these white doves. And I just knew that they were a sign that he was ready, and that he was ready to cross, that he was ready to leave his physical. And it just brought me so much peace, And that's something I've learned, is that peace is not void of challenge. It's not void of grief or pain. It's being able to stay with it that's peaceful. And the next morning we had this beautiful doctor come to the house and to help him transition peacefully, because he asked for assistance. He needed assistance leaving his body, and I wanted to honor that for him, because I had always promised him I would do that when the time came. He'd been a little worried about it for a few years before, and I had, just different connection points with him, reminding him that when he was ready, he would get the choice to leave when he wanted to. And so that morning I had a playlist I'd found on Spotify, in a call playlist, and it had so many beautiful songs that I had known for a while that really were comforting in times of grief. And I had just kind of let the playlist play out. We had candles burning, and it was a beautiful ceremonial crossing for him. But right at the time he was crossing, he had chosen this song that came on called the Gopala Lullaby. And it wasn't until later on that I looked at the cover, and it was a white dove. And the minute he passed, and when I felt his soul leave his body, I just saw this eruption of white doves and felt this immense peace that he was so deserving of, because he had gone through so much in his life and was just so deserving of that peace. He'd earned his opportunity to cross when he wanted to. And I just saw him, I felt his energy travel straight into my heart. And this is a very sort of like private experience I'm sharing, but this podcast is definitely a safe space for me to share, and my Scorpio rising self sometimes likes to keep things private, but here it just feels very comfortable to share, because he was such a staple in, of course, my life, and I shared him a lot, and I just feel like he deserves to be shared here. And so it wasn't until afterwards that I kind of started putting together all of these, these different links, and I saw these messages he had been leaving me that I couldn't see before. I was just not ready to see them. And I, Matt and I spent days and days following, just processing, all of these things we started realizing about him and what he gave us. And what we realized is, like, he was such an evolved old soul and such a guide. And I feel like I've lost a child and an elder at the same time. And with his loss, I'm also experiencing a loss of myself. I'm experiencing the loss of who I was. I think I'm experiencing the loss of my maiden, needing him so much, needing him to feel safe, needing him to feel comforted. And I'm in a place now of just witnessing myself strengthen and believing truly that I can navigate anything alone if I need to. He's also helped me reckon with my fear of loss across the board, not just with him, but also, loss of the way things were, the loss of a chapter, the loss of, the change the loss that's held in change. I mean, nothing will include him in the same way moving forward, which brings so much grief, but also knowing that he's present with me in a different way, in different form, is so comforting. And that I have his support in ways that I didn't even have before. It wasn't until after he had passed that I felt these signs sort of coming through, and one of them was a hotel room key that I had before he left, before he passed. And we had been in a hotel room the night before, 2 nights before he passed, because we were traveling back to St. Louis and decided to turn back around, realizing that he wasn't handling it well. And we're still not quite sure what had happened, but I think he just chose this exit point. And had told us that he wanted to make it to the winter. So this was sort of his agreed upon time to cross over as well. But I looked at the hotel room key that I, for some reason, had saved, which I never do, but it was in my purse, a few days following his passing. And the hotel room key said, "It's time to let me go." And I think it was a Hilton key, and it was sort of just like, I don't even know why it said that, but I just could not believe it. And I just knew like he was connecting with me, letting me know that it was time, that it was okay, and that this was agreed upon, and that this is what he wanted more than anything, you know? So it has been a very, precious, sacred grief portal that I've been in, and I'm just forever grateful to have experienced this, to experience the relationship and the amount of love present there. I know many of you have said that the loss of a pet is much different than the loss of a human, and I completely agree. I think that their relationships are different. I think the purity of the love is unique to that experience and that experience alone. And that makes the grief just as big as the love. And that's something that, I've always known, and it's not until you're like really fully in it that you feel it. And I think because I had so much attachment trauma and fear in relationship, and this sort of avoidant attachment, that I needed him in his beautiful light body, his golden Christ consciousness incarnation, this golden boy. I needed him to help me heal, because I would not have been able to trust someone else to help me do it. And he's been the most precious teacher to me. And his loss, it feels, it's definitely a loss of myself. And of course I'm grieving that alongside losing him, but it's left a crater, and I'm just leaning into that. I'm leaning into it. I'm letting myself contract and just feel into what it feels like to be with that loss as much as possible. William Blake said, "The deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy." And that's completely true. It's, when I lost him and walked through that threshold that I had been terrified to even imagine, for 13 years, I felt on the other side my heart actually cracked open. And, I've done a lot of heart work, but it wasn't until I felt that cracking open and I felt the expansion and the light pour in that I knew that it's true. Grief and joy are sisters, and we can only experience our joy when we experience our grief. And they're on these opposite sides of the spectrum, right? They are opposite one another, but they mirror the capacity. And so if you are terrified of feeling your grief, you will not get to experience the joy that you are deserving of. And that's why grief work is so important, because we not only have, events that cause such deep grief in our lives and in the collective, but we also have stuck and stored grief that is keeping us separated from ourselves. And our relationship with death is a very clear mirror for our emotional health in general, our well-being, our physical health, our mental health, all of it. And that's something, I'll continue talking about, throughout this podcast, because I do believe the root of most of our suffering is our fear of loss, our fear of grief, stuck and stored, unprocessed grief. And I know many of us are experiencing massive grief right now. The world is cracked open. We're seeing and witnessing horrific events across the globe, and we are witnessing what it's like to experience like pure darkness. And I will tell you that when we can integrate that darkness, whether it be fear, terror, hatred, grief, whatever it is, it has medicine for us. It has something to teach us. So I just encourage you to honor your capacity during this time, to allow the contraction to happen if that's what wants to occur, to pray, to meditate, to go inward, to do what you can to honor your capacity. So knowing like what you can do, what you do have capacity for, how you can change not only yourself, but your family unit, your community. The card I pulled today was the Praying Mantis card from the Untamed Elemental deck. And it says, difficult to spot as she rests in the leaves, Praying Mantis is revered for her ability to remain still. When she does move, she steps deliberately. Nothing is done without intuitive verification, which assures her safety and success. In this way, Praying Mantis communes with otherworldly modalities of truth. In her world, the unforeseen does not exist. Rooted in the stillness of her rumination, she remains open and certain, a prophet of tranquility. Praying Mantis appears when the medicine of meditation is most required. The more complex life gets, the more you will benefit from truth offered by your inner sage. The price for this wisdom is to immerse yourself in the calm waters that exist beneath the waves of worldly distractions. Make space for the voice within to speak. Praying Mantis will guide you toward stillness and clarity. This is her territory. When it's balanced, you're informed by internal wisdom. When it's imbalanced, frenetically driven by the ebb and flow of the outer world, to bring into balance, stillness, and meditation. Thank you all for being present, for being wonderful in navigating the twists and turns of this year. I will be doing a yearly sort of reflection and a 2024 forecast episode. So just be on the lookout for that. I will be releasing episodes over the next few weeks as well. And I do have some spots left for my private mentorship, which begins in January. And I'm very excited about this round of mentorship. I've changed a few things and it just feels really aligned. It's designed to help you navigate big change portals, working together to get into your deep core layers, creating a deeper connection to self, to your own sacred nature, to your history, but also to your present, so that you can inform your past, feeling more empowered. And so it's a 3-month container. You can find more information on my website. It's my favorite way to work with people. It's super powerful and very, very transformative. And it's just an honor to get to do that work with you all. Once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. It's always appreciated. Sharing on Instagram, rating, reviewing the podcast. It truly means the world. Thank you for holding this space for me to share today. It's very intimate. It's very raw for me. You can probably hear it in my throat a little bit. Like I had to sort of do some processing and, staying present with many inner parts that were kind of feeling activated as I talked through this today. So it was a journey, and I am just grateful if you listen and this resonates. Feel free to share with me. I'd love to hear your stories. I know I've already talked to many of you who have had familiars and companion animals who have just touched you so deeply. And I know, for me, I know that he'll always be present with me, and maybe he'll reincarnate. I really asked him to at the end, and I didn't get a clear answer because, I don't blame him if he doesn't want to come back. I'm like, listen, you do you, but I'm just saying, if there's an opportunity and you want to, I would love to have you back here in my incarnation. So we'll see. But regardless, thank you for just listening and being present. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I will talk to you soon.